Hello, welcome back to the Joy of Code. Welcome coders. We are continuing with our series. We had quite a break of a few weeks where I haven't put out any new episodes. Sorry for that if you've been impatiently waiting, or maybe you've been relieved that you have a bit of a breather. I've been traveling around for a while for work. I've been at various conferences. I was in the US for a few workshops. At a conference I was in Germany and so on. And giving a few workshops here in the UK as well. But now I'm back home and I'm getting back into more routine work. And so I thought it's high time to record another few episodes and get on with the joy of code and get on with coding. It's a beautiful, nice summer's day here in the UK as well. If I look out my window, it's actually sunny and green. That's quite some change. The summer here so far was really only detectable because the rain was getting warmer. But now it's getting nice. I'm settling into my summer and I think I'll manage hopefully to record a few episodes, a handful of episodes over the next few days or weeks, and we can get going again and continue. I actually had to watch the previous episodes just now to remind myself what we were up to. And in fact I left you hanging right in the middle of a task that was only half finished. We had this breakout game and I promised you that we would work on completing that, or at least getting it a bit further, and we wanted to place the blocks at the top of the screen, and there were supposed to be several rows of blocks, and I placed only one row so far, and now we continue straight where we left off and get on with things and try to place a few more rows of blocks. And that actually gets us straight from the first look at loops already to quite a fairly sophisticated use of loops, and that is a nested loop. That is, if we have a loop in a loop. It's this, we don't have much practice with loops yet. We only have seen them once. It's actually jumping ahead a bit without getting a lot of practice already in a sort of slightly more complicated structure. But I think we can cope with that. So let's just look at that and see what it looks like. By the way, you can, again, the scenario as it is at the beginning of this video, the one I'm starting out with, you can download from my blog. So go to the blog, it's called Breakout version 5, and is attached to the blog entry. So if you're watching this on YouTube and not on the blog, look in the information under the video and find the link to the blog, and that's where you can get the code. Okay, enough talking, let's get on with coding. Okay, here I've got the the breakout scenario available exactly as we left it off at the end of the last episode. So here I've got the one row of blocks at the top, and here in the board class, that is the method that we wrote last time to place that row of blocks. So now what I want to do now is I want to have actually 3 rows of blocks. So I want to do essentially this placing blocks. I don't want 6 blocks, I want 18 blocks. A better way to think about it, instead of saying I want 18 blocks, is I actually want 3 rows. So instead of saying I want to place a block 18 times, I'm saying I want to place a row 3 times, where every row is 6 blocks. So I'm saying it like this because that suggests a code structure. It just suggests that now we're doing placing one block 6 times. Now we're just doing that whole, placing a whole row 3 times. So what we're actually doing is we're putting another loop around this loop. This loop here is the one that places the 6 blocks, and now we place another loop around it that does this 3 times. What most people do here, most sort of practiced programmers, is to create a nested loop. That is, to put this loop inside another loop. So you have one loop inside a loop. That works, and I will tell you in a few minutes why stylistically I don't think it's a good idea, and we do that slightly differently. But first I show you that way because it is a very commonly seen pattern, a nested loop. So there you would put just a loop inside that loop. So we put another while loop around this, and now our indentation is all mixed up. So I can go to the edit menu and say auto layout, and it fixes my indentation. So I have one while loop, inner while loop. The outer while loop should run 3 times. So I want exactly 3 rows. I could do the same thing as here. I can just put a y. Yeah, let's do the same thing as here. I put a y coordinate in here. So the y coordinate here was 30, and now I want to make that a variable. So I say I define a y variable that I start off with 30, and then I use y here instead of 30. And then I can say every time, while I haven't finished all my rows yet, this loop paints 1 row, and then I increase y. I increase y, so that becomes y plus, and then half the height of this block, which is 20, plus the gap. So I add here, oh no, not half the height, the full height. So 20 plus the gap, assuming I want the same sized gap vertically that I want horizontally, then I can use my same gap constant that I have defined up here. We can see what that looks like. If that doesn't look good, we can define a different gap for the vertical placement. And we want to do that while y, where is my y? Y is less than, okay, so I will increase it here by, the gap is 12, so that's 32 each time. So I start off at 30, then it's 62, and then it is 94. So that's where I want. So while it's less than 94, I want to keep going, and when I hit 94, when y gets over 94, then I want to stop. Let's try that out. I compile this, and it doesn't work. Why does it not work? It has actually placed only 1 row of blocks. So first of all, so now we have an interesting case of an error. Most of the errors we've seen when we hit compile are syntax errors, where it says as we have written something incorrectly. Now it says it has been compiled, no syntax error. Now I've got a logical error. And in fact, I honestly don't know what it is. I have to look at that in a second. In this case, it has actually compiled and run, but it doesn't do what I expect it to do. It has placed only 1 row instead of placing 3 rows. So let me see. The reason actually why I just moved this block, just to explain that, is I wanted to check whether it has maybe created the rows just one on top of each other. Sometimes it looks like 1 row, and when you take it away, you see there's actually another block behind it. So I was just wondering whether it had just created 3 rows but placed them all straight on top of each other, but that's not the case. It actually has created only these 6 blocks. So why is that? That would indicate that my loop has run only exactly once. So we start this with 30. It is less than 94, so it has gone inside this loop, and then it has executed this while loop. Then we came out, and here it assigns to y plus 20. That's 50 plus the gap is 62. And then it is still less than 94. It should really do that again. It is because we haven't reset x. The x, so that outer loop actually does run 3 times, but my x is still over right on the far end, so the inner while loop immediately ends. That is a very tricky thing. I actually have to put the initialization of my x. I have to put that here, take my initialization away here, and start off my x with 50 again every time I paint a new row. Okay, let's try that out. And now I've got 2 rows, and that is actually because I do this only when y is less than 94, and in fact the third time around it is equal. I should do that less or equal to 94. Compile that again, and now it runs 3 times, and there is my 3 rows of blocks. And this now looks the way I want it to look. Okay, so in one sense of the task, we are now finished. This implementation does exactly what I wanted to do. It paints and places 3 rows of blocks. And here, if we look at this, now we have a nested while loop. That is, we have a while loop that contains in its body another while loop. So what happens here, we go into the outer while loop, then we go in here, go into the inner while loop, and the inner while loop twiddles around a few times and then drops out of the loop. Then the outer while loop goes around, and we go in again, and the inner while loop twiddles around again 6 times, and so on. This works. Now, I said before that stylistically I don't like that, and I think actually there's a better way, and you should do it differently. I said before, when we talked about style, that every time you have a separate logical task, you should move that separate logical task into a separate method, because it makes your code structure nicer and easier to read. Now, one special case where that applies is when you have a nested loop. The inner loop is always a separate logical task. So here, for example, I'm saying 3 times place a row of blocks. So the inner loop, what the inner loop does, this bit here, is it places 1 row, and placing 1 row is a separate logical task. So instead of writing a nested loop, what you should always do is replace the inner loop with a method call that contains that loop. So I will refactor that now. Remember, refactoring is changing my code structure so that it is cleaner without changing the functionality. So I make here a private void method called create row, and I pass the y coordinate in as a parameter. So now here I take this out, cut, and here paste, and fix my layout so that the indentation is right. So now here this method creates 1 row at that given y coordinate, and that parameter y is used here to place the y coordinate. And now I can put my local x variable here and remove it here. And there, where the loop used to be, we just call this method. So I write here create row, and I pass the y that I have initialized here and that I'm counting in as a parameter. So now this code should do exactly the same. Let's try that out. Compile this, and yes, it works. And if we look at this code now, what this says is here, creating the blocks consists of 1 loop, where in a loop I create a few rows, and create row consists of a loop where I create in a loop a few blocks. This is a much nicer structure. It's easier to read. Every one of those methods, each of those methods is easier to read. I do not have a nested loop. So as a style guide, keep in mind, whenever you have a nested loop, consider moving the inner loop out into a separate method and make it a private method. You end up with cleaner, easier to read code structures. Okay, try that out. Until next time, bye bye.